We can begin, and I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to today's webinar brought to you by the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council and the University of Tennessee School of Natural Resources. Our sole goal for this monthly series is to help you grow healthier urban forests where you live and to work in a way that helps benefit the lives of people through a variety of topics that we hope to offer you. My name is Neil Letson. I'm a Tennessee Urban Forestry Council member and your host for today's session, which is titled Urban Strike Team, Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee. I also would like to introduce Katie Donaldson. She's the communications specialist at the University of Tennessee, and she handles all the webinar logistics and technical aspects. Katie, how are things going in Knoxville?
It's a beautiful day in Knoxville. It's sunny and mostly blue skies outside.
We like this cool weather, don't we?
Yes, we do. It's much better.
It is. Well, I hope it's pleasant where you are. And now that you know a little bit about us, we'd like to know a little bit about you. So we simply ask that if you would share your location of where you're watching this from. All you got to do is go in our chat room and just list your city, state, and with many of you, your country. It helps us to get a better perspective of our audience and hopefully present programs which are relevant to your needs. So thanks for doing that. So before we start with our webinar, I will ask Katie to go over a few of our housekeeping items.
All righty. Just bear with me a second. Trying to share my screen now. I'm having the issue that we were having earlier. There we go. Okay. So everyone, just to make it easier, if you are on this webinar to receive CEUs, please make sure that you are registered for this webinar. I will put a link in the chat if you're not registered for it. And also to help me out, if you would either change your name to your full name so that I know who all is participating in this webinar, or you could just enter your name into the chat along with your ISA certification number for the CEUs. That would help me out a lot. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please enter those in the chat as well, and we will get to those at the end.
Okay, thanks, Katie. And I'll reemphasize that if you do have any questions, please enter those in the chat room. We're going to allow some time at the end for our speakers to follow up or give more detail if you do have some things you want them to expand on. So thanks again, Katie. Now it's time for me to introduce our two speakers. The first is Eric Kuehler, who is an arborist with the Metro Water Services in Metro-Davidson County, Tennessee, former USDA Forest Service employee who I first met many years ago in Athens, Georgia. And then we also have Ashley Kite-Rowland, who is the Tennessee Division of Forestry's partnership coordinator. And she's done a great job of helping our state build its urban forestry program. So we're happy to have both of you here today with us, and we're eager to hear from you. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ashley and Eric, and it's all in your hands.
Okay, Ashley, I guess I'm going to go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Here we go.
Thanks,
okay, well,
Neil.
thanks, Neil, and welcome everyone. We were asked to share a little bit about the Urban Forest Strike Team. And I have to apologize for the title. We forgot one main word in that title. It's Urban Forest Strike Teams that have been developed, and just wanted to share with you a little bit about this resource that urban foresters, urban forest managers have access to, at least here in the United States, and mainly in the eastern United States. So for those of you outside of the eastern portion of the United States, well, maybe this is something that you can develop where you are. So it's not a matter of if, but when that next devastating natural disaster is going to occur in your city. And so it's we always want to be able to recover effectively, efficiently. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit about the Urban Forest Strike Team and what we've developed over the last 15 years or so, and just recently here in Tennessee. So let's see if I can move forward. So I'm preaching to the choir here when I talk to you about all of the benefits that our urban forest provides. I'm not going to go through any of these except to say that our urban trees are necessary infrastructure. In fact, here in Metro Nashville, I've worked for the water utility, Metro Water Services, as the arborist, and our job is to manage these trees, and we manage them for stormwater mitigation. It's in our stormwater management plan, and our elected officials fully understand what these trees are providing to us. And our director and everyone in water services felt like that the trees were such a necessary part of our management plan that we've actually included them, and now we're starting to actively manage them. I don't need to tell you that cities are a harsh place for trees. When I first got into plant physiology, I was drawn to trees in the city because it's such a hard place for to grow, for trees to grow. So open grown trees don't grow like forest trees. Forest trees are always competing for light, and so the crowns are typically compact and they're growing upward, trying to find light. Well, and they've got their neighbors to keep them standing upright, to buffer them against wind and ice and whatnot. But open grown trees in the cities are different altogether because they don't have their neighbors within the tree. They're competing for light, and so they're sending out branches, overextending themselves to get that light resource. And so because we have a lot of weight on the ends of these branches because they're overextended, well, they're open to ice and wind events, put a lot of load on those, and they can break relatively easily because they don't have their neighbors to keep them from falling over or from falling apart. And in our municipal environments, especially after a storm, city resources are limited. Our main objective in a city is to get that basic infrastructure back up and running. This is usually clearing the debris from the roads, getting electricity back running, getting electricity to the pump stations so that we can pump water and water to the homes and sewer away from the homes. And so that usually takes precedence after a natural disaster. Sometimes the municipal employees are temporarily reassigned to other duties. After Hurricane Katrina, we were down in Biloxi, Mississippi, and we were going to help them assess their trees. And the urban forester was happy to see us because we were there 4 months after the hurricane. And because he had been temporarily assigned to some other task, rights of entry, he hadn't had a chance to look at the trees. And so he was appreciative that we were there to look at the trees for him because he didn't have the capacity because he was temporarily reassigned. And it's probably no news to anybody that trees in the city usually take the lowest priority for anything. So assessing tree damage is typically low until trees start to fall apart and start falling on people, and then it becomes a higher priority. And sometimes these smaller municipalities don't have experts on staff. They don't have urban foresters, urban forest managers to look at these. And so those communities are even more limited with their capacity. So after a storm passes, there are a few questions that we typically need to ask ourselves. So how can we maintain as much canopy cover as possible? You know, we want those benefits in our city, but we also need to make sure that the public is kept safe. So, you know, at what point do the risks of these trees, these storm damaged trees, outweigh their benefits? These are some of the things that we need to weigh. And then the last question that we're always asking ourselves is, do we have the capacity to make these assessments in-house? And then the knowledge to make these choices, whether to cut or to keep these trees in the landscape. So that's how the Urban Forest Strike Team kind of came about. Back in 2004, 2005, we were having a lot of hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast states here in the southeastern United States. And the forestry agencies, the urban and community forestry coordinators, were having to deal with these communities who were reaching out to them, asking them for help, anything. And so the state coordinators came to us. At the time, I was with the USDA Forest Service and Urban Forestry South. And they came to my boss, Dudley Hartle, to ask for some help, to help develop some type of a program that could help these municipalities within the states that were impacted by some of these storms. And so in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit. And at the time I was living in Louisiana. And so it was quite beneficial for me to be able to drive down to New Orleans and help Dudley put this program together. I don't pretend I don't want to give you guys the impression that I had anything to do with this. It was all Dudley. I was just there riding his coattails. And so now that he's retired, I guess I get to pick up the mantle, at least here in Tennessee. So we had our first training for a strike team in 2007 in Kinston, North Carolina. And then in 2008, the northern states realized that they're getting hit with a lot of ice and some of these wind events. So they started to come into the fold, and we started developing this quasi-nationwide urban forest strike team. So basically, most of the states east of the Great Plains of the United States have an urban forest strike team in one capacity or another. Typically, it is tied into the state forestry agency. Just this year, Tennessee was able to establish an in-state team. I do have to give a shout out to Tom Simpson here with the Tennessee Division of Forestry. At least he's retired now. He took that very first training in Kinston, and so he was Tennessee's urban forest strike team for the longest time until he retired. But now we have a full-fledged team, and so happy days here. So what an urban forest strike team is, it's basically just a traveling team of certified arborists. They're typically tied in with the state forestry agency, but not always. There are some states that have a team of municipal foresters and tree care professionals that are able to assist municipalities with assessing trees after a natural disaster. Our job is to help cities and towns assess large amounts of public trees after a storm. Like I said before, typically in-house municipalities don't have the capacity to do this. So it's the team's role to step in and help those municipalities to assess these trees. We perform a rapid storm damage assessment. It's a modified level 1 tree risk assessment for those of you who are have the track qualifications. We do a 360 around the tree, but we're really just attracted to those trees that are damaged by the storm. And so our main focus is public safety. We want to make sure that these trees aren't going to fall down on anyone after FEMA walks away, after all the cleanup is done. So we mainly focus on public safety, but we're also looking to retain as much tree canopy cover as possible. So a strike team kind of looks like this. It's made up of a team leader and assistant team leader. Both have the track qualifications. And then we have anywhere from 3 to 7 two-person crews, depending on the severity of the storm and how much help is needed this whole concept is scalable. You know, we could bring in more crews if we need to, but typically it's the crews that go out and are assessing trees. The team leader and the assistant team leader, they're like the incident commanders. They're the ones who not only keep the crews working, collecting data, but they are also working with the urban and community forestry coordinator. They're working with the municipality. They're working with the public information officer and with GIS. There is GIS support with each of these teams. Typically, the GIS support is remote because you can do GIS anywhere, right? So this is what makes up an urban forest strike team. The information that we provide is mainly to help with FEMA reimbursement. So for a nationally declared disaster, FEMA public assistance funds will become available to those municipalities, but FEMA needs data in order to help with administering those funds. So the data that we provide help a municipality with the FEMA reimbursement. FEMA public assistance categorizes trees as whole tree removal or trees that just have limb hazards. And so the strike team will place these storm damaged trees in one of these two criteria, whether it falls in the criteria for a whole tree removal or whether it falls into a criteria for just limb hazard removal. And so we're collecting data on whether the tree falls into the whole tree removal or the limb hazard removal. And then we're also providing spatial data, which is what FEMA will need, latitude and longitude, in order to provide public funding. But strike teams also provide this value-added information for the urban forest manager. So the information that we'll also provide is this cursory risk rating for prioritization. And so every time we go out and we look at a tree, we're using our tree risk assessment qualifications. We are looking for or categorizing these trees as the risk for failure, the risk for impact, and the consequences of failure and impact. And so we're able to collect those data and then come up with a final risk rating. It's cursory because not being the urban forest manager in those municipalities, we're kind of limited with the information that we have, but at least we can provide a cursory risk rating so that the managers then can identify those hot spots where those extreme and high risk trees are. Although we are looking at the FEMA criteria for whole tree removal, we can use our professional skills to recommend other treatments because we are trying to keep as much tree canopy cover as possible. Although a tree may fall in a whole tree removal category for FEMA, we a lot of times can recommend ways that that tree can be saved, kept in the landscape by cabling and bracing, or even doing some extreme pruning to keep the tree in the landscape. So we can provide some other recommended treatments for the urban forest manager. And then if the tree falls into that limb hazards category, limb hazard removal category, then we will assess the tree for other residual risks. You know, once those limbs are removed, what other risks does this tree have? Maybe the tree had some existing issues beforehand. So it's just to give the urban forest manager more information about how to manage after the storm. And then, like I said, we're also providing spatial data because not only does FEMA require it, but it also helps with contractors to help them know where these trees are. And it helps the urban forest manager kind of see the big picture of where the hot spots are. So how's this information useful to cities? So now that I'm on the other side, I'm on the municipal side where I'm managing the forest. these are the things that will be helpful to me. So this information provides me with a helpful management tool to efficiently manage that risk after a storm. It helps the city to know where the highest priority tree risks are, so that I can develop a plan. And legally, that would be helpful, because if trees start falling and we haven't gotten to those areas, at least I can show this information and say, hey, we're working on this plan. We went to the high risk areas first. It helps us to proactively increase public safety. So we're not just waiting for these trees to fall after a storm. We can start being proactive and get some of these risky trees, these hazards taken care of. And then, like I said before, it provides useful data for FEMA reimbursement and their public assistance program. And so this is going to be my segue to Ashley and what she's going to be talking about. So when would we want to consider calling an urban forest strike team, at least here in the eastern United States? There needs to be significant tree damage and risk to the public following a storm. We're not just going to come out for 10 or 20 trees. We need hundreds or thousands of trees. If a municipality can't handle the load for assessing these trees, then we'd want to reach out to our state forestry agency. And then if it's too much for them to handle, then we will call the larger strike team and call members in from other states. The footprint of the assessment area needs to be relatively concise. Now, for large ice storms, that's not always possible. So what we've done here in Nashville is I've got 30 of my highest priority areas that I know that we will need assistance for. And so I've kind of pulled those areas out. So if we have a strike team come in, I've got my lists of high priority areas that we can go to first. We'll consider calling in a strike team for assistance if the municipality lacks the expertise or the resources to do it in-house. And then it's also beneficial to be able to use this information. We don't want to call these guys and girls in just so that the data can sit on a shelf. We need to be able to do something with it. And so the community has to have the capacity to follow up either with FEMA or with the state forestry agency to help mitigate some of these risks and hazards. So I'm going to leave it there looking at the time. I think, Ashley, that should give you time to move forward with that. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you have it.
Thank you, Eric. Let's see if I can share my screen now. Can you all see that?
Looks good.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. So I'm Ashley Kite-Rowland. I'm the Urban and Community Forestry Partnership Coordinator here in Tennessee, and I'm employed by the Urban Forestry Council, but I'm contracted through the state. So I was introduced to urban forest strike teams probably 2 years ago when I started working in this position. And then it fell into my lap to help coordinate developing one here in Tennessee last year. So I've been working really closely with Eric and others throughout the state just to get things up and going. And what I'm going to present on today are all the things that I've learned. At first, I thought that it would just be about developing the strike team. But what I realize is it's connected to many other things that we need to do in order to responsibly care for our urban and community forest and to respond effectively after natural disasters. So I'll talk to you a little bit about readiness. Eric has mostly covered response, so I'll talk to you about how here in Tennessee you would activate an urban forest strike team, and then recovery, which is an essential component to disasters because we do want to preserve as much canopy and then replant as much as we can. So Eric covered this and you all know it. Trees are essential infrastructure. They provide many services that are environmental, social, public health benefits. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So we have time for questions. So, and well, one thing I will talk about is that trees are really important for human health and well-being. That's the area that I focus on quite a bit. So if you don't know about the benefits of trees to human health and well-being, I encourage you to dig in because it's really fascinating. Also, in places where they do have trees, there's many positive outcomes for communities. One thing I like to talk about when I'm talking to government officials is that there is higher rates of spending and time spent in areas that have more trees. So if you're wanting to attract people to your community, having a really healthy and robust urban and community forest is a good thing to help keep that going. So here in the Southeast, urban forest strike teams have been really active in other states. Tennessee has not had one, a formalized urban forest strike team until this last March when we did host our first training. But in the Southeast, these have been going on for quite some time, like Eric said. Also here in the Southeast, there has been an emphasis in the urban and community forest programs to have communities prepare for disaster. And that's based upon hurricanes and learning lessons and figuring out how to get FEMA reimbursement and all the things that you're going to encounter after a storm that make it really difficult to do what you need to do to preserve as much canopy as you can and to get the hazard trees out as quickly as possible so that they're not causing risks to safety in people's lives. So I'm going to share several resources that have been developed with you all today. I'm mainly going to be talking about Tennessee and the Southeast, but the resources are applicable to many different areas. So first, what we're encouraging communities to do is just think about disasters and people are often thinking about disasters in relationship to the humans that are there, which are really important, but they're not thinking about disasters with concern to trees. So we're wanting people to think about their urban and community forest and what needs to happen so that they are properly prepared for a disaster. The first thing that we want them to do is to see their urban and community forest as essential infrastructure. And in that, you probably need to know what you have. So it is really important to know what trees you have, to have an inventory. You don't have to have that, but if you have the capacity to know what trees you have, then that is a really good step, because if you see something as an asset, you do want to know what you have. And when you're preparing, you need to let the community know the plans once they're established. And one part of that planning is to establish pre-contracts. We hosted a training here in Tennessee with Karen Firehawk and Darren Green out of Louisiana, and they talked about the importance of pre-contracts as you're preparing for a storm that will inevitably come. And they're really important because, as Eric said, the municipal employees are oftentimes caught up doing other things after a disaster. So they're not able to come in and do the work themselves. And after a storm, whether it's a tornado, a hurricane, an ice storm, private property owners and public property owners are going to be needing service for their trees. And then you're going to be encountering all kinds of different people, some that have good qualifications, some may not have as good of qualifications, some may not be qualified. So they're all pitching their services to you, and the price point can go quite high. And I heard an NPR story recently. There was the hurricane that went through Georgia. And what was going on is that people were coming in and offering tree services to help get the debris out of yards and that kind of thing. And they were getting payment and then not completing the work. So there's also risk for that if you don't have plans in place for your community. And when you do have pre-contract, when you're pre-contracting for service, like debris removal and that kind of thing, then you are more likely to get someone that is familiar with the process and cleaning up the debris. And then when they're familiar with the process, you're more likely to get reimbursed by FEMA, which all communities are going to want to do that. And the higher, the rates will be higher because there's going to be more compliance if you get someone that knows what they're doing. Because FEMA, that's a whole convoluted process. And so you want to pre-contract with someone to do your debris removal after a storm that knows how to navigate FEMA and what the requirements are. So to help your community plan for this, the Community Forestry Academy offers classes that are free. This has been a push here in the Southeast for quite some time. Here is just the intro page to the Community Forestry Academy. You can see it helps community plan for storm events. It doesn't just have to be an arborist. This could be other people in the community that can take this class. There's the FEMA debris criteria where it just helps you to see things like how FEMA would see it. So that's really helpful. There's also training on here for the Urban Forest Strike Team Task Specialist and also the team leaders. So of course, people need some hands-on training and experience, but these courses will allow them to have a certificate to serve in those capacities. And so then if you could follow up with some hands-on experience, then that would be great. And you will be on your way to getting your Urban Forest Strike Team established. So those are things that you're going to do to get ready. One other thing that I learned to get ready here in Tennessee is that we have a different department that deals with debris, and they require debris management plans in all of their solid waste management plans, which are required for all counties. Since people are on here from all over the place, what we do here in Tennessee is probably different than the way that things are done where you are. But just know that you will have someone in your state, some department that is charged with solid waste or vegetative debris management, and they are going to have requirements for how the debris is managed after a storm. Here in Tennessee, they have planning tools and guidance that can help. But one of the things that is super important when you're thinking about the debris management is that you have to take it somewhere. And here in Tennessee, you can have those sites already located, and you can have them permitted, because it's not only do you have to know where you're going to take it and have permission to do that. There's permitting that has to take place to demonstrate that it is safe to take materials from a storm there. And that's because at that staging site, it's not just vegetative debris, it's going to be all the debris from a storm. So just dig into your state and figure out how debris is managed. And here you can get go through a pre-permitting process. So when the storm strikes, your site that you've chosen has already been identified, there's a permit in place, and folks can get to work immediately. So if you have a pre-contract in place, hopefully they'll get there quickly and your debris can be going to your permitted site. And I have an asterisk there about community wildfire protection plans. Those are also really important. So if you're planning for storms, also just do wildfire planning too. The graphic there is about separating your debris. That is really important, but the reason I have it on there is communicating what you're doing to the community is so important. If the community is not aware that you have plans for after a disaster and that there are things that are going to make it easier, such as separating your debris as you're cleaning up your yard, they're not going to know to do it. And you can start pushing it out after the storm, but everyone's mind is going to be elsewhere. So really communicate to the people that you serve when you are in this planning process. So Eric really focused on response. So here in Tennessee, the Tennessee Division of Forestry responds immediately after a disaster to help clear streets and just do that emergency response. We have chainsaw crews that go in and that kind of thing. The strike team will not go in immediately. It's going to be after power's been restored and all the emergency situation is taken care of. If you are in Tennessee, which most of you aren't, then what you would do is you would contact your local emergency management director to let them know that you would like the Urban Forest Strike Team to come and provide that service after the storm. They would then contact the people here at the Tennessee Division of Forestry, who would contact me at this point in time, and then I would get the strike team together to respond, and we would coordinate directly with that community leader. Another thing that you can do here in Tennessee is you can just directly contact me, and I can activate that system by calling the EMA director. So either way works here in Tennessee. All states do it differently. If you don't have a strike team developed in your state, that's just something you need to think about. Like, how are you going to be activated, and having a clear system in place so that everyone knows how to use it across the state. And if you disappear, someone else could step in and it just still runs seamlessly. So first training here in March. Our strike team here in Tennessee consists of Tennessee Division of Forestry staff and also municipal arborists. And the municipal arborists that came, or municipal foresters that came to our training, what they were talking about is that if a sister community has a storm, then what they would do is they would go and respond to that storm, and then vice versa. So the state employees are charged with covering the whole state, and then the municipal foresters are just awesome. And they want those services to come to them when they need it, so they're willing to provide it to their sister cities throughout the state. Here in Tennessee, we do plan to host more trainings. Since the Community Forestry Academy is online now, we have much more capability to get people trained. And then when storms come, we can offer them that hands-on experience with what it feels like to go and be deployed after a natural disaster. And another thing that we're doing here in Tennessee is we have the readiness aspect that we're really pushing, that communities plan for disasters. We're developing the capacity to respond effectively. So we're doing great at that immediate emergency response. Now we have the strike teams to support communities. But then we want to look at recovery, because if we want to responsibly manage our urban and community forest, then it needs to be full circle management. We need to be growing them and maintaining them and then utilizing them. But also when we're responding to disasters, it's also a circle. So we have our readiness, response, and then recovery, and then we're moving back into readiness after that. So with the recovery aspect here in Tennessee, what we're doing is working with communities after we've responded to connect them with financial resources to help replant the trees in their community. And we do that through multiple ways. The Arbor Day Foundation has great grants to help communities after disasters. Our state has lots of grants too. And then we will help provide the technical assistance as well, so that the trees are planted properly and hopefully will live for quite some time. So again, we talked about full circle management. One thing that's going on throughout the whole country is Inflation Reduction Act funding for urban and community forestry. It was a historical amount of funding that has been invested into urban and community forest throughout our country. And every state is receiving funding, but part of that funding can be utilized to help create these plans that I'm talking about and preparing for disaster, but also to help develop urban forest strike teams and to do the recovery. And all this funding is focused on communities that are disadvantaged. You can get online and see what that is, but you can really help build your urban and community forestry program with these funds and with other funds that are available in urban and community forestry. I really encourage you just to get to know your urban and community forestry coordinator in your state and reach out about funding opportunities, and to see if you have a strike team and how you can be engaged as your community. And I will stop there because I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. But if you all have anything that you want to ask me and you don't want to ask during this time together, then please feel free to email me at any time.
Okay, and make sure y'all can hear me. We do have a few questions that were entered in the chat. The first one, how does the strike team get paid for their services?
Yeah, so I can start, and then Ashley, I think you will probably need to finish that up, at least here for Tennessee. So how it started was we had Forest Service backing for the first, 15 years or so. As of this year, Forest Service funding has dried up. So now we had been working, and we knew that was going to happen. And so we had been working with the EMAC, Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And then funding can also come through. I just had a blank moment. I guess you could charge it against your FEMA funds as well. But Ashley, I think you had more information, at least for us here in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a very good question, because it's something that we were working through, especially since the federal funds dried up here in the Southeast to cover these things. So it has been a conversation piece. Oftentimes when we go out it may not be declared a federal disaster. And so you're taking a chance there. But our fire crews do it all the time. I mean, they go out and they respond and they do debris removal and things like that because they're responding to all disasters. And so here in Tennessee, we would eat those funds, like if we didn't get reimbursed by FEMA. However, if a community gets FEMA reimbursement, then the time that was spent doing that work can be reimbursed to the state. For municipal arborists, that's different. So we would not at the state level be charging for their time. That would be something where they're going and doing it just in good faith and being a good sister city. So they would have to work out with their city whether they are going to pay them to do the work to help another community or not. But at the state level, what we've worked out right now is that we would go and we would cover the cost of it if there is a need. And then if FEMA reimbursement does come through, then we would get our cost back.
Yeah,
Is that-
typically here in
Answer it.
Nashville, our municipality supports this, and I've responded to a couple of responses in the last 3 years, and they encourage us to help out. They typically will pay my time, they won't pay my travel, and so either that's on me or the host city takes care of that, and my lodging and whatnot.
And I do think if you talk with your state's urban and community forestry programs, sometimes there are funds available. Like maybe there was a grant program where all the funds were expended. So when you encounter an issue, I mean, that can't sustain it forever. But if you have an extenuating circumstance where someone is not going to get covered, then it's possible potentially within your state to get funding to cover someone if they're not going to be covered by the community that they work for, or if they're not going to fall under the state and FEMA reimbursement thing.
Okay, the next question, is there a website that shows where the strike teams are located?
I don't think that there's one website. I can send you some websites that talk about the strike teams here in the Southeast. And Katie, if you want to send it out to everyone that was on the meeting today, I also have lots of other resources that are available for free on preparation and that kind of thing. So I'll just send you those. And then if you want to send it out to everyone, then I'll just share all the information that I have.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll also put links to it in the YouTube video that I post of this recording afterwards. Next question, are there any other ways strike teams could assist municipalities with tree risk issues outside FEMA reimbursement? If not, could there be?
Yes, I can answer that. So initially we had started this out as kind of a three-pronged attack. The first one was for immediate response, and the state of Georgia is doing this, the Georgia Forestry Commission. Their emergency management agency usually calls Georgia Forestry Commission out right after the storm passes to assess damage, or not damage, debris. So fallen debris on the ground. And so they will calculate that for their state emergency management agency. And then, of course, we had the tree risk assessment. The last one was tree planting assistance. And so we had developed a protocol, which is very similar to the tree risk assessment protocol, to identify potential planting locations and provide those to the municipality so that they could replant in recovery.
Next question, how do the different state strike teams interact and share information?
Yeah, that's usually through the urban and community forestry state coordinators. When I was with the Forest Service and I was managing the strike team, I would, I think it was annually, I would reach out to the state coordinators and ask them to give me numbers of how many active strike team members they had. Since then, I think that they are developing that amongst themselves. Is that right, Ashley?
Yeah, I mean, here in the Southeast, in our region, we work very closely together. So all the coordinators know one another, and then And what was the question about how do the strike teams interact? Yes, so they came, like when we hosted the training here in Tennessee, we had people from other states getting trained, and there is oftentimes a multi-state response in the Southeast when we have really large storms. So I don't know how it is with the rest of the country, but here in the Southeast, we interact quite a bit.
Yeah, typically there's an urban forest strike team advisory committee made up of state agency personnel. I think our UNCF coordinators now kind of make that up, but they are the ones that, at least in the Southeast, maybe the Eastern United States, because I think the North does this as well. States that are wanting to have a training or something will go to that advisory committee and ask to put that on. And then so they coordinate all of that. And there used to be funds for that. I don't know what that's going to look like going forward. But yeah, so there typically is an advisory committee that is the liaison between the municipality or the state agencies and the needs out there.
And it's kind I have entered into a new era in this, in that now that the training is available online, I'm not sure how we're going to navigate it. So I just saw that they have it up, the task specialist and the team lead training, but there has to be an in-person component to that. So we haven't yet had a training post having those online things that are available to people. So that is something that we're navigating here in the Southeast to see how to get people the hands-on experience that really counts for a lot when you're going to be doing this work.
Strike teams seem a key part of the post-storm recovery phase. Any thoughts on ways municipalities can prevent or mitigate future storm damaged trees?
Well, management. We have a cyclical tree pruning program here in Nashville that we've just started. And a lot of times that involves reducing the crowns of those trees that are overextended. So, that's one thing that you can do. Strengthen those tree canopies if you have the capacity to manage the trees actively. Fortunately, we have a funding source to allow us to do that. I know a lot of municipalities don't, but managing trees, identifying those trees that have issues, potential risk, included bark and cankers and whatever else. Identify those trees and maybe work towards planting around them for succession, and then consider removing some of those trees with hazards.
Is the GIS data accessible to the public?
Yeah, typically that's not. Typically that is for municipalities only. Now, however, the municipality or the state decides to make that available. But for legal reasons, I think that a lot of municipalities don't share that with the public until they're actively managing that.
And is tree risk assessment qualification a requirement for every urban forest strike team member?
Just the team leaders. Yeah, we don't require it for the task specialists. Many of the task specialists have those qualifications, but we require it for the team leaders. And that's to give FEMA assurances that we have these professional credentials to help make these assessments. Before strike teams came along, FEMA was hiring retired firefighters and police officers to make these assessments, and they wouldn't know the nuances of tree risk. And so part of the package was to share with FEMA that, hey, all of our team leaders, assistant team leaders have these credentials, and we know what to look for when we're assessing these trees.
This isn't a question, it's a comment, but someone in the chat said here in Illinois, we have started doing MOG deployments and then give the community the data, and they have agreed to move forward with certain aspects of their programs. For example, moving towards Tree City USA with a certain time frame. Just a comment in light of y'all's
Yeah,
presentations.
and that's how we started out too. When there wasn't disasters and we needed training, we would go to municipalities and we would essentially give them a free inventory, just so that we could train our guys, our teams to do these tree risk assessments.
Those are all the questions I have. If anyone else has a question, feel free to put it in the chat. And then of course, okay, someone just put one in there. Is there a component of these services that monitors the recovery or replacement trees? I see many newly planted trees with mulch piled up around the base.
Yeah, that's pretty common. No, there is that's all left up to the municipality and the urban forest management team for that municipality. And so they could develop in-house some type of a monitoring team, but that doesn't come with the strike team.
Yeah, and that's something that we were talking about here in Tennessee with the recovery aspect. It's not enough just to connect communities with the financial resources or with trees. It's providing that technical assistance so that they're planted properly and they're mulched properly and that they're taken care of. And many small communities don't have folks that are assigned those duties. So it's just anyone going and maybe planting the tree, just whoever they can pull off something else. So we do want to work in those communities to develop either trained volunteers that know how to care for trees and are committed to doing that, or a department within a community if they don't have people specially assigned to take care of the trees in the community. So technical assistance is essential, because if we want the trees to reach maturity and establish the canopy that's so important, they have to be cared for and not volcano mulched, because that's not a good thing. I see it all
That
over
is
the
not a
place.
good thing. I wanted to make one clarification. We've got that online training session now, and originally that was set up for refresher training only. And yeah, going forward, now that there's no Forest Service funding for this, I don't know how that's going to work, but I think that I would be cautious about going through the training and then calling yourself a strike team. There needs to be some coordination with that Urban Forest Strike Team advisory committee, so that we can get on the rosters. This committee knows who all is has taken the training and done everything like that, and so they know who to call in the event of an emergency or a deployment. So for those who are considering starting a strike team in your own state and just using these resources, I would recommend reaching out to the advisory committee first, just so that everything is done on the up and up. FEMA is expecting this certain level of professionalism, and that's what we tried to build up when we started this. And so I think FEMA is there. They recognize that the strike team provides this high level of professionalism, and so we don't want to water that down any. So talk with the advisory committee, and if you're thinking about becoming or your state becoming a strike team or having a strike team.
Absolutely. I want to back up what Eric said, because I may have made the or given the impression that you should only take the online courses, and that is not the case. Like, you really do need the hands-on experience, whether it's a mock deployment or you are actually going to a disaster, maybe with a team, to see how it's done. So having gone through the mock deployment here, I can see how taking an online course is not going to be enough. And we do want these services to be utilized and to grow. So having a consistency across the board is really important. And one more thing I wanted to add is that here in Tennessee, we will respond to disasters even if they're not a federally declared disaster. So we will respond to disasters if the community needs us, because oftentimes, and it will be state personnel, like if it's a small storm or something like that, we can go out and help communities because oftentimes they don't have the people to do that, or they may not have someone with the expertise. So we would try to find someone to go out and help if it is needed.
Yeah, and so that's our plan, actually. After a disaster, we'll go out and we will assess and see if we have the capacity to handle this ourselves. If not, then Ashley's on speed dial, and I'm giving her a call, and we'll see if we can't get TDF in here to help out.
And one more thing that I wanted to add in quickly is that in navigating all of this, I've realized there are tons of state agencies engaged. TEMA, which is Tennessee Office of Emergency Management, they are very active. And actually the emergency managers are oftentimes dealing with debris management after a storm. I learned this last week at the director's meeting. It's like, that's crazy. So they're the ones doing debris management after storms. But then also TDEC, which is our Environment and Conservation Department, they're the ones doing the permitting and everything like that for the debris management sites. So on working on the strike team stuff, it's really connected me across like government sectors, and also you're working with communities. So I just encourage you to reach far into these other agencies so that when you are developing these plans, you have all your ducks in a row. And also the collaboration that you develop will just make your responses much stronger.
So we do have a couple more questions, but in light of time, Neil, was there anything you wanted to say, or I guess, are y'all able to stay on and answer these questions?
I am.
Let's
Sure.
ask them. Ashley, Eric, can you hang on a little bit longer?
Yeah,
You bet.
absolutely. And if anyone feels shy and doesn't want to type in a question, feel free to email us too. But I can stay on.
Okay. You were talking about the training. Lisa, who lives in Nashville, asked, is there a training program or courses offered for neighborhood organizations or a way to collaborate with them?
Yeah, not at this time that I'm aware of, but that would be maybe something to explore here in Nashville. I think that would be a good resource for us.
And I know, so online, that Community Forestry Academy, they have classes, like courses that you can take to help a community prepare. So that might be a first step for a neighborhood organization, just to get awareness on all the things that they need to do to plan. And then maybe if in their community, they could advocate for that to happen, or at least be planning for that space. Because I feel like just getting the information can really take you a long way.
Are assessments based on storm damage associated with the specific disaster, or are they based on all factors? Is this determined by the municipality?
No, this is determined by FEMA. FEMA will only reimburse if it's a nationally declared disaster. FEMA public assistance only kicks in for the most current storm event that the strike team is there for. So any residual, anything that was from prior storms, and typically you can see that out in the field. You can see what was old and what's new. FEMA won't allow that for reimbursement, and so actually they are checking behind us. So it's not like we can slip anything in on them.
And this final question, I think it's supposed to be, what do you do after the storm evaluation? And do you know what worked and what did not?
Just from experience, it is really based on the municipality and what the municipality has capacity to do. After Hurricane Gustav hit Baton Rouge, we went down and helped the urban forester there, and the guy knew what he was doing, and so he really appreciated the data and was able to get things cleaned up relatively quickly. I can't think of any non-success stories, but I'm sure there are some out there. But it really just depends on the municipality.
And I did want to provide one clarification, like, because I've had this question when I've been doing presentations recently, is some folks thought that the urban forest strike team would go in and address the hazards, and that isn't the case. And you guys probably all know that, but we would just assess for the hazards and then provide that information to the municipality. And then hopefully they have a pre-contract in place with someone who is already lined up to do the work. And so they would get that information to them, but we are not doing the work, just the assessment.
All right, well, those are all the questions that I have.
All right.
Very good.
Thank you. And those are great questions. And let me just, I'm looking at something that I read last week, Ashley and Eric, that as of Monday, I think that was this Monday, the United States has endured a whopping 23 separate weather and climate disasters that were at least caused $1 billion in damage. And that breaks the record set last year of 22, and we still have 4 months left in this year. So whether this is cyclic or our brave new world, these disasters are going to be with us for a long time. And that's why your topic was so timely. And I know it resonated with a lot of folks. And I really appreciate the information not only that you brought this information, but the work you're doing here in Tennessee and beyond to make our urban forest safer for people. It's very important. Also, one other point, Eric, you brought up Dudley Hartle, who was quite a character, as being one of the ringleaders of getting this off the ground. But also there was Paul Revel, one of our the people from Virginia made a comment about the late Paul Revel, who was the coordinator in Virginia. But when I was still around working in urban forestry, he was a key player in getting this started in the Southeast. So he needs to be more than a footnote in the history of these strike teams, Paul Revel. And if the Virginia folks are still on there, I know they loved him, and he was a great guy. This is part of his legacy as well. So with that, thank you again. And to our audience, this is our last webinar for 2023. Katie and I need a break. So we're going to take the next 2 months off and try to get ready for next year. And we have some topics that we're looking at to begin this next January. You might want to put January 18th on your calendar. That'll be our our first webinar in 2024. And Katie, as soon as we put all this together, I think it's going to be a great year again. And thank you so much for participating as an audience and with your questions over this year and your regular attendance. I recognize a lot of names. Can't pronounce them all, but I know you're from all over. And it really makes us feel like we're doing something that's meaningful. And lastly, if you have some comments that you would like to make this better, some speakers, topics, we're all ears, and we would appreciate that. And maybe even some of you would like to give a presentation. We will certainly entertain that as well. So thank you all for being with us today, and thank you, Ashley and Eric and Katie, for a great webinar. We'll see you next year.
Thanks.